Live from Quito, Ecuador. This is from the South, the Daily News Brief from Telesio English. I'm Sonia Gray and we start this new edition right now. Brazil's labor reform, a central pillar of President Michel Temer's policies, will go into effect this Saturday. Trade unions and other groups are holding protests across Brazil to try and block it. The government argues that reform is needed to bring Brazil's labor laws into line with modern negotiating practices. But the unions say the new legislation will strip workers of their basic rights that they have enjoyed for more than 70 years. They say it also risks worsening unemployment, which already affects over 3 million Brazilians. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Limas, has the details.
Hello,
Soini. We're in Plaza da Sé Square in downtown Sao Paulo, one of the 24 cities where protests are taking place to demand the immediate suspension of Michel Temer's labor reform that will go into effect from tomorrow. This represents a 50-year rollback for workers in terms of labor rights, because now employers will be the ones who decide on holiday periods, lunch hours, and the number of working hours. That's the reason why they're here protesting, but also against several other measures, like the planned pension reform, which raises the pension age, and also other policies of the Temer government. For example, the freeze on public spending for the next 20 years, especially in health and education services. These are all measures to reduce public spending, which the unelected government is pushing ahead, even while its own popularity has plummeted to just 3%. That's why unions and social movements are protesting against these government measures.
Ignacio Limas in Sao Paulo. Hurricanes Irma and Maria cut a path of destruction through the Caribbean, where for many countries tourism is the main economic driver. Let's look at some figures from the Caribbean Tourism Organization. It says that this year's violently active hurricane season has reduced flights to Puerto Rico by 25%, flights to Dominica are down 13.7%, and those to St. Martin and Anguilla have fallen by 12% and just over 6%, respectively. To discuss this some more, we turn to the former Tourism Minister of the Bahamas, Vincent van der Poel Wallace. Mr. van der Poel Wallace is also the former CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We've just read out some very bleak statistics about Caribbean tourism after the hurricanes Irma and Maria. What is the current state of the industry?
Well, I guess so many people have heard so much about what has happened in the places you identified, they forget that there are about 35 destinations in the Caribbean. So you talk about 7 that were affected to any degree. So by and large, you find that the Caribbean is open for business almost everywhere. And I'm a member of the board of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association now, and really focused on making sure that we let the world know that the Caribbean by and large is open for business. And those 7 destinations that were hit to any significant degree, they're on their way back. And you'll find that even some of the statistics you presented earlier, they're beginning to increase in terms of flights coming back into the destination. And the one thing we've been very proud of is the number of destinations who have not been affected have been raising funds and providing assistance to those who were affected. So we're getting back up to speed quite rapidly.
But climate change is going to be a very, well, we've already seen that it's a very serious issue to the Caribbean, and it would attack its tourism industry very directly. What should the region do to adjust to this new reality of warming weather, stronger hurricanes, especially if it wants to insulate its tourism industry?
There's no question this was a great lesson for all of us because, one, to begin with, is taking a look at standards. I mean, we allowed in some places standards really to fall away and drop. We had some of the best building codes you want to find anywhere in the region, in the world for that matter, but quite frankly, enforcement is the most important part of it. So I think you're going to find a great deal of deep review regarding our building codes to start off with. Second of all, we want the rest of the world to begin to understand that global warming is very real and begin to do everything we can to begin to mitigate that. Third of all, we got to be very concerned about where we build within our region. When you begin to build on the waterfront, on beachfront areas, we begin to look at that. So there's a much more comprehensive review going on right now regarding what we're going to do in the future because of the lessons we've learned from Irma and Maria.
And finally, even though I can talk to you much longer about this, so Caribbean tourism does have a future.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, the Caribbean is the world's most dependent tourism area, largely because we have such a great variety and such wonderful destinations. I think the world begins to see that. But it's very important that people come to understand that the Caribbean is a great deal more than those destinations they've heard about that were affected directly by hurricanes. You're going to find us coming back better, much, much stronger, and a much more collaborative way. And by the way, you're going to see Caribbean promotion as a group starting very, very shortly. We begin to understand that we can't simply go it alone ourselves. We're going to begin to promote all the features of the Caribbean and all the things that we're beginning to do to mitigate some of the effects of these weather features.
Thank you so much for that update. We've been talking to Vincent Vanderpool Wallace. He is the former tourism minister of the Bahamas, and we were just speaking to him about what the Caribbean needs to do to recover or to treat with the new reality of global warming and how it affects their tourism industry directly. Cubans have been reacting to the new U.S. measures to tighten its blockade on the island, which came into effect on Thursday. More details in this report.
Ismael Perez is showing tourists the delights of colonial Havana, just as the Trump administration's new sanctions against Cuba come into effect. In the coming months, North Americans could disappear from these groups of tourists traveling the island.
This prevents us from showing U.S. citizens that there's nothing to be afraid of when they come here. A lot of them are afraid because what the U.S. media say about us, that we're a terrorist country. And when they come to Cuba, they realize it's quite the contrary.
The Cuban government believes that these new measures will harm U.S. businessmen. They'll lose out on the opportunities that currently exist here. And the Cuban economy will also suffer, both the private and state sectors.
These measures by President Trump confirm the serious setback in our bilateral relations. They imply a strengthening on the blockage. These measures don't hide their political intentions, like the one encouraging travelers to carry out certain activities to justify their visit to Cuba.
During almost 6 decades of revolution, hostility has rarely been absent from Washington's policies towards Havana. So the latest tightening of the blockade doesn't seem to surprise many Cubans.
They're trying to go backwards. These are old measures, a policy that will definitely not work. They're totally out of date, but that's how imperialism works.
Among the 180 Cuban entities facing new restrictions, there are hotels, social organizations, and even soft drink brands and photographic services.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Few days in Guatemala, indigenous movements and campesinos have been protesting against hydroelectric and mining projects. Social leaders have also warned that if the demands of indigenous people are not listened to, the current conflict could worsen.
Another day of protests in the Guatemalan capital, but this time in front of the Congress. The Altiplano Campesino Committee joined the demonstrations in the last few days to reject the hydroelectric projects. They affirm that the political class of the country doesn't care about social interests.
They respond to powerful people, to businessmen and oligarchs, to landowners, and they don't really care about the development or initiatives in favor of the people. We believe it's important to make this known and to try and make a change in the state.
Other protests are taking place in the northern state of Alta Verapaz, But outside the Constitutional Court, people are speaking out and saying, in the region, several villages have been left without access to water from the Cajabon River because of extraction projects that have diverted it, something they say is not benefiting the people living there.
Those families taking over the natural resources are the only ones growing financially. They are becoming more wealthy every day here in Guatemala, even when there's more poverty every day.
This week's protests in the country were a subject of analysis in the Forum Campesino Life, the postponed debate. Social and indigenous leaders agreed the claims from the indigenous people are not being listened to by the authorities, and at the same time, thousands are still living under extreme poverty.
There's a historic abandonment record in this country, which can be seen more in the lands, but it can also be seen in the work conditions, because to this day, there's still some levels of slavery in some farms and agricultural lands in this country.
Campesino and indigenous organizations that have been protesting over the last few days were not spoken to or contacted by any governmental authorities, so they've been announced new protests before the end of this year.
A student from a teacher's college in Ayotzinapa was shot by Mexican police as they tried to disperse a protest that has lasted 3 days, according to witnesses. The student belongs to the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College in Guerrero, the same school that 3 years ago saw the disappearance of 43 students in one of the country's most serious cases of human rights violations. The teachers of the National Coordination of Education Workers also joined the protest to demand that the government rebuild schools and universities affected by the earthquake on September 19th. Argentine Senator-elect and former President Cristina Fernandez appeared in a Buenos Aires court on Thursday over an investigation involving alleged money laundering. Fernandez spent 25 minutes at the courts. She refused to answer questions but read a statement regarding the case. Her family is being accused of receiving kickbacks from the Hotelier Hotel owned by Lazaro Baez in exchange for public work projects. But Fernandez accuses of managing fiscal paradises in offshore accounts. An Argentine judge, Gustavo Leral, who is in charge of the Santiago Maldonado case, decided to call for a board of medical experts so that they can report on the conclusions of the autopsy.
The investigation of Santiago Maldonado's death is progressing very slowly. The aim in the next few days is that experts will reach a consensus on the activist's cause of death. All the while, human rights organizations are still calling for justice.
It is the worst human rights violation. The life of Santiago Maldonado, his forced disappearance, and then his death. We are here demanding justice.
Argentina's government continues to cover up Maldonado's cause of death. Meanwhile, the judge handling the case anticipated that the investigation still needs time, as they are working on rebuilding the scene where the body of Maldonado was found and looking for those responsible.
There are certain things that haven't been clarified, and there is evidence that people wanted to remain that way. They've washed trucks, places. They've delayed for 78 days to give any kind of report. The government is not looking for justice or truth.
Maldonado was participating in a protest in defense of indigenous Mapuche land rights on August the 1st, when police clashed with protesters. According to witnesses, Maldonado was taken by police during the clash after being reported missing for 80 days. Maldonado's body was found on October 17th in the Chubut River and was identified 3 days later by his relatives.
We're here waiting for the results. As relatives and human rights organizations, we believe that the government participated because he was forcibly disappeared when police clashed with protesters, and his body appeared after many, many days.
The cause of death is expected to be revealed soon. Relatives and human rights groups are waiting for the autopsy's results that right now are being analyzed by a forensic medical team. They'll continue to demand justice and truth about those who are responsible for the death of Santiago Maldonado.
Colombian authorities have confirmed that 4 people were killed and 20 others are still missing after a mudslide swept through the town of Corinto early this week. Families and rescuers have been searching desperately through mud-plastered rubble for victims of the flooding. Heavy rainfall caused a surge of mud and water to overflow from the Paila River and crash down onto the town on Tuesday. At least 37 homes were destroyed.
It's hard to be in this situation with the house like this. It's completely flooded. There's no way to live here, so we are waiting for aid from the state, hoping that they will do something for us, because we are left with nothing and we need help to continue living here.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. British prosecutors have admitted deleting crucial emails about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who continues to be holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Correspondence between the Crown Prosecution Service and its Swedish counterparts was deleted just 1 week before a scheduled tribunal hearing in London. The CPS lawyer involved in the email deletion retired in 2014, and it emerged that he allegedly advised the Swedes in 2010 or 11 not to visit London to interview Assange. The U.S. President Donald Trump has sent a strong message to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit taking place in Vietnam. Trump said his country will not tolerate chronic trade abuse and insisted on fair and equal policies. He added that the U.S. is ready to sign bilateral agreements with the countries of the Indo-Pacific region, but on the basis of mutual respect. Our reporter Isiara Diaz has the latest developments from the APEC Forum that is underway in Vietnam.
The
Asian Pacific Forum has already started in Da Nang, in the center of Vietnam. There, leaders of the 21 member countries are discussing the challenge the region has to improve trade. Today, the U.S. President Donald Trump talked belligerently against North Korea and its nuclear program, an attitude that doesn't surprise anyone. In terms of economy, he attacked the World Trade Organization and announced Washington would only cooperate with APEC members that agree with Trump's view on what are fair agreements. He said his country suffers from chronic trade abuses and criticized former U.S. government's trade policies, which, according to him, cost the jobs of millions of U.S. citizens. On the other hand, China's President Xi Jinping once again defended globalization, integration, free trade, and the improvement of international economic structures, the complete opposite of the U.S. stand, and by all the members at the APEC Forum. There are other important points on the table. The 3 Latin American countries, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, are defending, along with 8 other members, the revival of the TPP. The TPP was signed in 2016, but it lost its impact after U.S. abandoned it with Trump. This time, under the name of TPP-11, important economies in the region, like Japan, are looking to strengthen the agreement. Stay tuned for more developments as the forum ends tomorrow in this city of Da Nang in Vietnam.
It's your ideas with that report. More than 300 Filipino activists protested against the visit of President Donald Trump to the Philippines outside the U.S. Embassy in Manila. The protesters threw black paint at images of Trump and his Philippine counterpart, Rodrigo Duterte, and also burned a mural of the 2 presidents. The U.S. president is set to meet Southeast Asian leaders and attend the ASEAN summit on the final leg of his 5-country Asia tour. Meanwhile, Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte was in Vietnam giving a speech in defense of his war on drugs, in which he admitted killing someone when he was 18.
When I was a teenager, I had been in and out of jail, rumble here and there. At the age of 16, I already killed someone. A real person. Had rumbled, stabbed. That was when I was 16, and it was just by looking at each other. What more that I'm now a president?
And now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
In Lebanon, Hezbollah have released a statement declaring that the country's prime minister is being detained in Saudi Arabia and that his recent surprise resignation was forced. Hassan Nasrallah declared that they will not acknowledge the resignation as legitimate, saying that Riyadh's actions are politically motivated and intended to destabilize Lebanon. Zayed Hariri's party also released a statement to call for their leader's return to Beirut and, according to Lebanese officials, are prepared to work with foreign states to secure his return. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, has said that the world needs a new digital Geneva Convention and called on governments to act. This during a United Nations conference that took place in Switzerland. The tech company official proposed to set a number of global rules for cyber attacks. Cyber attacks have increasingly been used in recent years by governments to achieve foreign policy or national security objectives.
The world needs a new digital Geneva Convention. It needs new rules of the road. What we need, we believe, is an approach that governments will adopt that says they will not attack civilians in times of peace.
Pope Francis has strongly criticised nuclear weapons and said that the world should condemn their possible use and their very possession. The appeal came during a two-day conference on nuclear disarmament that brought together 11 Nobel Peace Prize winners, United Nations and NATO officials to discuss the prospect of a world free of nuclear weapons.
We can't help but feel a deep sense of unease if we also take into account the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental effects of any employment of nuclear devices. Therefore, if we also take into account the risk of an accidental detonation as a result of error of any kind, the threat of the use as well as their very possession is to be firmly condemned.
Thousands of workers in Athens protested outside Parliament against the government's reform policies that plan to change the strike legislation, making it harder for people to protest. Workers also demanded their wages be protected, a higher minimum wage, and the end of property repossessions from owners who could not pay bad loans. Greece is going through a third review of its economic reforms by its creditors to access further financial aid as part of a bailout program that expires in 2018.
The Speaker of the dissolved Catalan Parliament has been released from jail after her supporters paid her bail. Our correspondent in Madrid, Vincent Montagut, has the details.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Saludos a todos desde Madrid. Pues sí.
The ousted president of the Catalan parliament, Carmen Forcadell, has been released from an Alcalameco jail a little after 2:30 p.m. She posted bail by paying 150,000 euros, the amount the judge imposed to allow her to go free. The Catalonia National Assembly, one of the two most important secessionist organizations, confirmed that the cash came entirely from its own accounts, specifically from a so-called resistance reserve that receives voluntary contributions from citizens committed to the cause. This resistance reserve will also be used next week to pay 25,000 euros of bail, which the judge also imposed on 4 members of the parliament. All of them have been able to avoid jail for 2 main reasons. They comply with Madrid's application of Article 155, and they abandoned their unilateral action to achieve the independence of Catalonia. The prosecutor said the risk of them escaping has been greatly reduced, as well as the chance of them incurring in criminal acts again.
Vincent Montagut with that report. It's exactly 99 years since the First World War ended. It had involved 4 years of slaughter on an industrial scale, never seen in any previous conflict. Great Britain was one of the colonial powers involved, and it drew on citizens from its dominions to feed the fighting. And that's how men born in the Caribbean became soldiers in the First World War. We're joined now by Judy Raymond, a Trinidadian journalist and writer, to talk about the West Indian War effort. Hello, Judy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, how are you?
I think that people would be surprised that West Indian persons willingly signed up for the war in Europe. Why do you think that they did?
Well, they were good British subjects at the time. And, of course, this was several decades after emancipation in the British Empire. Some steps had been taken to kind of raise them out of the poverty and lack of education in which they had been left at first after emancipation. And they felt as, good British subjects. They wanted to do their duty by the mother country. I mean, I think they got a rude awakening when they got to Europe and discovered how they were treated and how they were regarded over there. But as I said, they were being loyal to the empire and the crown and felt that they ought to make this contribution.
So, Judy, how do you think this part of West Indian history has actually been received in the region? I mean, as a Trinidadian, I was not aware that we took part in World War, that we had fighters in World War I. Do Caribbean people understand this part of our history or even appreciate it?
No, I think very little is known of it. Governments pay lip service on Remembrance Sunday and go to the cenotaph and lay wreaths, and there are lists of the names of those who fell. But no, there probably aren't many people who appreciate that little Trinidad, whose population then would have been less than it is now, and we still only have a little over 1 million, sent 2 battalions to fight in the war. Quite a few of whom died, and a lot of them, the non-white ones, were extremely badly treated because, racism was entrenched in Europe still at that point. They felt they would be welcomed as British subjects fighting for king and country, and they weren't. They got the most menial jobs. They were subjected to racism, as I said, because, in fact, after emancipation, a lot of racist attitudes actually became more entrenched than previously. So they were terribly disillusioned by that. Then, having served in the war, they came back home and were not given the hero's welcome that some of them still thought they might get. They couldn't get jobs, etc. And in fact, ironically, it was their being good colonial servants and going to fight in the war that eventually led to a lot of anti-colonial feeling after they came back home. And there was industrial unrest, the formation of the early trade unions, and that led to the major upheavals of 1934, and from then on, the strikes in the oil belts and so on, and eventually the beginnings of the independence movement.
Okay, thank you so much for chatting with us. We've been talking to Judy Raymond, a Trinidadian journalist, about Caribbean people in taking part in World War I, and we actually used footage from a documentary commissioned by the Parliament Channel of Trinidad and Tobago called The West Indies at War. The entire series is actually uploaded to their YouTube channel, so if you want, you can have a little look at it there. And with that, we've come to the end of this midday news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can check our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.